Now we come to the second panel that we showcase key strategies by leaders from social sectors, winning strategies example from the field. Ladies and gentlemen, this session we have panelists who speak English and Thai, so please allow me to remind you again for your best experience to choose your language preference by clicking the globe icon and select the audio channel either in English or Thai. In this panel discussion, we will discuss on what makes public-private partnerships for social good impactful and sustainable. A new CAP study identifies key strategies of best-in-class PPPs for social good. Let's hear from leaders of these organizations about what they do, why they do it, and how they know they're bringing important value into their communities. So we have three panelists, Ms. Shahnaz Al-Sadat, Ms. Veronica Gabaldon, and Mrs. Tivaporn Srivarakul. Now I would like to introduce and give the floor to our moderator, Ms. Mehvesh Mumtaz Ahmed, Director of Research at Center for Asian Philanthropy and Society. She leads the generation of evidence-based insights to maximize private social investment across 18 Asian countries and territories. She also engages in policymakers, business leaders, media to escalate system change. Ms. Ahmed has extensive experience in research, analysis, and management across the public, corporate, and nonprofit sectors. She has worked for the New York City government under Mayor Bloomberg, for the World Bank and UNDP, and in the strategy consulting entrepreneurship space. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcome Ms. Mehvesh Mumtaz Ahmed.
Thank you very much, and I'm absolutely delighted to be moderating this panel of three very accomplished female leaders who lead three of the most successful public-private partnerships for social good that we cover in our newly launched study. Let me give you a little bit of a background about why we are looking at public-private partnerships for social good, and then I'll introduce each of the panelists and hopefully have a very engaging conversation around the strategies and the challenges of running and setting up and running successful PPPs for social good. So we at CAPS observed a rising trend of public-private partnerships for social good across Asia. We observed that companies and other private sector entities were launching joint ventures with government to meet Asia's large and increasing social challenges. And there were a number of motivations for this. As Ruth had mentioned earlier in her presentation, sometimes the ask comes from government because it wants to crowd in private capital. Sometimes companies themselves want to really contribute and be sustainable, as we heard from our illustrious panelists before this, to the extent that 88% of leading Asian business leaders in our network said that they think these kinds of joint ventures, these kinds of public-private partnerships for social good will become even more common over the next 5 years. And although the motivations for why they're occurring might vary, as you'll hear from our panelists here today, the fact is that they are win-win-win for communities who have access to greater and better quality social services. They're a win for governments, which gets to fulfill its mandate of quality social service delivery for all. And it's a win for companies that get to maximize the impact of their social investment and lend their expertise towards complex social challenges. This is the kind of the reason for why we should be looking at public-private partnerships. But what do they look like and what makes them successful? So here, let's hear from Shahnaz Al-Sadat, Veronica Gabaldon, and Tivaporn Srivarakul. Let me introduce each of our panelists and then hand over to them to start with a brief description of each of the PPPs that they're involved in. So first up, we have Shahnaz Al-Sadat, who is the chairperson of Leap Ed Services. She has a long and storied 20-year career in the corporate world, including as executive director of Malaysia's Sovereign Wealth Fund, from which she actually launched the Yayasan Amir's Trust Schools program about 10 years ago. And she has led the conception of this PPP with the goal of transforming public schools to produce globally competitive talent. With us, we also have Veronica Gabaldon, who is the Executive Director of the Philippine Disaster Resilience Foundation. She leads its strategic direction, she leads its programs and administration with the goal of building resilient businesses and communities. She's one of the most renowned women leaders in disaster relief and resilience in the Philippines and is a strong advocate of private sector engagement before and during crises and shares her experiences on various international platforms. And last but definitely not the least, we have Tivaporn Srivarakul, who is the Managing Director of Pracharath Samakkee Kanchanaburi Social Enterprise Co. Limited. It's one of the most notable PPPs for social good that we cover. And she also, under its umbrella, leads the hospital food safety project, which we will hear more about. She is a long-time environmentalist and has been working in environmental conservation and management since 1989. And she's received multiple awards, including Best Thai Citizen and the very appropriately named Green Globe Award. And she also chairs various conservation committees. So without further ado, let's start right with an introduction to each of the PPPs that these incredibly accomplished leaders lead. Shahnaz, can I call upon you, please, to explain what the Trust Schools program is? What kind of a public-private partnership is it?
Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Mehvesh, and good morning to fellow panelists and all the audience here, and thank you, organizer, for inviting me. I'm speaking on behalf of so many stakeholders here, actually. So when we talk about the PPP for social good, the social good here is basically talking about producing the future generation of Malaysia children who are going to be good human beings and productive and relevant in the future world. In fact, today, I think the whole day I've been listening to is exactly what we are trying to address: the scarcity of resources, the wealth gap, the children today that needs to live in that kind of world need to have a certain skills and character that's probably different than the past. So, you know, the me to we doesn't happen by magic, right? So the question around critical thinking, around innovation, creativity, communications, collaboration, ability to coexist and leveraging a diversity and set a right level of confidence. So that's what the aim is, the social good. Clearly, what we want to do is therefore transforming the education system, and largely in Malaysia, 90% of the provision of the schools, basically primary and secondary, is done through the government schools, and that's where the middle and lower social economic income families, children are actually going. So because of that, the partnership itself, three main partners. The first one, of course, is the Ministry of Education of Malaysia, who basically the owner of these 10,000 schools across Malaysia, and partnering with Yayasan Ahmed. Yayasan Ahmed is a not-for-profit organization, have a legal arrangement with the ministry, but actually representing the collective interest of private sector. And the third entity is LeapEd Services, which is a social enterprise entrusted to design, develop and deliver the model. So these are the three key partners of this public-private partnership. The model itself centers around schools as unit of change, and therefore it's about transforming the learning environment in the schools. So if you want your children to be able to think, create, communicate, be collaborative, really your school leaders and your teachers need to be practicing that. Right, so it's not just the content, but the behavior, the pedagogical behaviors. So we work with schools to transform the culture of the school in order to actually develop these holistic students. That is as short as I can say. It's been 10 years. And today, I mean, the main thing is about coming up with a model that is implementable and actually showing impact. And after third or fourth year, we had a validation from an international outfit that it is transforming as what we thought it would be. So we kind of expanded. So we have about 94 schools throughout Malaysia in almost all states, because they act like a reference school as the system is replicating the outcomes in the overall 10,000 schools. I mean, that's where we are now. We still have some way to go, clearly, but yeah, that's in gist. I hope.
Great,
that.
thank you so much, Shahnaz. And I know it took a heroic effort to summarize all of that in a couple of minutes, and we'll dive more into some of the details shortly. Veronica, please tell us more about PDRF.
Good morning, Mehvesh, and thank you very much for having me here today. As you know, our country is often hit by typhoons, from Haiyan of 2013 and Mangkhut, and recently Goni and Vampo all caused devastation in our home and took the lives of countless Filipinos. Last year, Taal volcano erupted and 5 typhoons made landfall, all of that on top of the COVID-19 pandemic. And in those regions that were hit multiple times, the affected 2.4 million families and caused damage to agriculture and infrastructure amounting to almost 44.6 billion pesos. And in the face of such destructive disasters, the need for multiple or stronger multi-sectoral collaboration is highlighted. And among the unique aspects of the Philippines is its proactive private sector, not only when it comes to response, but also in all the other pillars of disaster risk reduction and management, be it in preparedness and mitigation or recovery and rehabilitation. And when it comes to private sector engagement and in disaster response, our organization, the Philippine Disaster Resilience Foundation's role is to make sure that efforts are well coordinated, efficient, and sustainable. PDRF is a DRR-focused nonprofit organization which provides a platform for cooperation among the private sector, donor institutions, government, and non-government organizations in carrying out initiatives and plans that ultimately make a positive and lasting impact. And embedded in PDRF is the principle of response preparedness through our operations center. We operate an emergency operations center, which we opened in 2018. We track and monitor natural hazards and pandemic and have established an alert system that makes it easier for companies to prepare for oncoming disasters. And the operations center also acts as a catch basin for all response planning and coordination. We grouped our member companies according to their core competencies, enabling efficient response mechanisms and improve existing preparedness plans for focusing on a common goal, which is saving communities and businesses through resilient services, lifeline services. We've partnered with government agencies, local government units, and local and international organizations in preparedness and response, keeping in mind that for disaster management problems to be addressed, unity and collaboration must be espoused. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica. Tivaporn, can you please tell us more about Pracharath Samakkee and the Hospital Food Safety Project?
สวัสดีค่ะดิฉันทิวาพรศรีวรกุลนะคะเป็นผู้จัดการของบริษัทประชารัฐรักษามัคคีกาญจนบุรีค่ะบริษัทประชารัฐรักษามัคคีเป็นวิสาหกิจเพื่อสังคมค่ะซึ่งเป็นนโยบายที่รัฐบาลจัดตั้งขึ้นมาเพื่อแก้ไขปัญหาเศรษฐกิจฐานรากนะคะแต่ดิฉันก็ทราบว่าจริงๆแล้วมีหลายประเทศที่ทำมาก่อนแล้วนะคะก็ประเทศไทยมาทำครั้งนี้ก็ถือว่ายังไม่สายเกินไปแล้วก็เป็นสิ่งดีมากค่ะในการใช้โอกาสใช้ความร่วมมือของภาคเอกชนธุรกิจแล้วก็ภาครัฐนะคะและภาคประชาสังคมแล้วก็ภาคประชาชนในการร่วมมือกันแก้ไขปัญหาเศรษฐกิจแก้ไขปัญหาความเหลื่อมล้ำนะคะแก้ไขปัญหาการใช้ทรัพยากรของโลกเราในขณะนี้ที่มีลักษณะเสื่อมโทรมอย่างสูงสุดแล้วค่ะก็งานประชารัฐจึงวิสาหกิจเพื่อสังคมครั้งนี้จึงน่าจะเป็นช่องทางที่สำคัญหรือเป็นพื้นที่ที่สำคัญในการใช้แก้ปัญหาเศรษฐกิจในทุกๆประเทศได้ค่ะ
Thank you very much, Tivaporn, and we look forward to hearing a bit more about the Hospital Food Safety Project, which is one of the most successful implementations of Pracharath Samakkee, and we'll do that as the conversation progresses. Can I start with asking the question of not why do different partners that are engaged in these PPPs come to the table? Once they come to the table, what makes them stay there? What is each partner, whether it's the private sector, the government, the community, what are they getting out of this partnership, and why should they continue to be a part of it? And Veronica, if I could begin with you and add to my question, PDRF has 61 member companies. what keeps them at the table, especially when outside of PDRF, some of them directly compete with each other in the business arena?
Thank you, Mehvesh, for that question. Yes, in PDRF, we're always fond of saying that competing organizations, competing companies work together in this neutral space that we provided in this platform, and rightly so, because in preparing or responding to disasters, we are all affected, and we cannot protect ourselves by itself. No organization can do it by itself. And it is only in a collective manner that we're able to prepare and respond for disasters. And that is exactly the platform that we have provided. And we have, in the past 4 years, we have focused more on preparing, on preparedness rather than response, because we see its importance, especially for companies, for member companies. And we develop programs that will build the resilience of the supply chain of our member companies, and that made or that provided that value and that desire to stay in the platform, because they saw the importance of building the resilience of the supply chain of the member companies. And part of that in our program is through business continuity planning. That language is a language that is very much known and familiar to big businesses, to the conglomerates. But for small businesses and their supply chain are actually part of the micro and small medium enterprises, it's not common for them. They see it. They see business continuity as something that only big businesses can do. And so what we did is we simplified the business continuity planning, simple enough that micro entrepreneurs, the small and medium enterprises can actually follow. And in making sure that we further strengthen our program, we partnered with government agencies such as the Department of Trade and Industry and also the Chamber of Commerce to build this ecosystem of resilience for the micro and small medium enterprises. You might ask why MSME is important. It's because 99% of the Philippine economy is composed of the micro and small medium enterprises. Thank you.
Veronica, if I can just ask a quick follow-up on that. You mentioned, business continuity training, and from my understanding, member companies also get advance warning of impending disasters. Yes. Can you explain what that means briefly?
Yes. The idea of having an operations center by the private sector started way back in 2014 during our board meeting, and we thought about it, and finally the board said, I think there is a benefit in this idea of coming up with a emergency operations center to be led by by the private sector. And so in 2016 we piloted in a small room an emergency operations center, and during that time we developed alert system, and we provided advisories to our member companies. And after more than a year of operating that, we said, we're ready. We're ready to make this as a permanent function of the foundation. And so we gathered our board to fund this setting up of the Emergency Operations Center. And today it is a full-fledged operations center running. And now we have partnership with international organization and also providing insights and learnings on how to come up with setting up emergency operations center by the private sector.
Right. Great.
Oh, if I may add also that this emergency operations center is working closely with the government. Of course, it is understood that in disaster response, in disaster management, the government is the lead, and we provide the support.
Absolutely. So you're keeping the spirit of the public-private partnership alive in all strands of PDRF. Shahnaz, if we could next hear from you, how do you align the incentives of all the partners that are involved in the Trust Schools program to stay at the table? And you had mentioned when we spoke earlier about the Trust Schools program pivoting and how you had to rejig and rearrange some of these incentives to keep everyone at the table.
Well, I think it must start actually with having a clear mission, right? And everybody subscribing to that mission. I think I always talk about the destination is very clear, but the route that we take to the destination may have to be adjusted as we go along. So what you need to carry everybody with you with that route, to be honest, is having a map and not getting lost, right? So our model is very much underpinned on the theory of change. And it's very clear that student outcomes is in the center, but what needs to happen or what needs to change in the classroom, what needs to change in the leadership of the school, what needs to change in the parents and community, and then what needs to change in the bigger system. So all stakeholders, comes from all these rings actually, whether, we are talking about from the bigger ministry policy level, right down to the teacher that's teaching that student. Private sector, from the big companies that actually give the funds, right down to the CSR team that wants to see, the outcome from the transformation. So we use a same map with the right signboards to align everybody to make sure that we all know where we are going. I think that's and I must say it's not an easy journey. It's not like, we knew this from day one. We had to develop this over time, co-construct it with a lot of the stakeholders. And landing it today, and even today, we are continuously changing against the external landscape. Like as pandemic hit us, for example, we had to adjust some of the routes. Right? We can no longer use the similar delivery methodology. We have to really shift a delivery methodology. So how do you make sure the transformation or the sustained of the culture change actually continues? So so alignment, is a continuous conversation. Has a lot of co-construction, a lot of debates, a lot of strategies to have a landing. Sometimes agreeing to agree and agreeing to disagree. There have been occasions, and especially if you start diversifying the stakeholders. For example, in the middle of about 5th year of our program, Yayasan Ahmed was a beneficiary to a socially responsible sukuk. It's like a social bond, right? That gives us a completely different stakeholder, right? So that's an investor that's looking at it. Yeah, so we use the same map, the same signboard, in order to actually agree on what is the indicator of success and the target, so that they all also are supportive of the actual mission, right? And at the end of the day, they are happy that whatever that they put in actually got what they want. So it requires adjustments all along the way, actually. But yeah, it's not an easy thing, I must say, but it has to be done.
And I think, Shahnaz, it would be great to hear an illustration of that. And I'll come back to you because you're leading us very nicely into another strategy for greater impact and success that we observed successful public-private partnerships across the region to embrace, and that is of nimbleness and agility, the ability to respond to changing situations on the ground and changing understanding of the needs of the communities that you're trying to serve. But let me actually just ask Khun Tivaporn to weigh in here. Khun Tivaporn, what do you think, what impact is the pandemic having on your program right now, and how is the organization responding to it? How are you keeping the partnership running?
โครงการส่งอาหารปลอดภัยเข้าโรงพยาบาลนะคะก็อาจจะกระทบบ้างในเมื่อมีสถานการณ์โรคโควิดนะคะแต่ว่าก็ไม่มากจนเกินไปนะคะเหตุเพราะว่าถึงอย่างไรมนุษย์เราทุกคนต้องทานอาหารนะคะแล้วข้อสำคัญ โควิดเกิดครั้งนี้เนี่ยไวรัสเกิดครั้งนี้เนี่ยก็เป็นโอกาสให้สังคมได้เห็นว่าระบบการทำเกษตรหรือแหล่งผลิตอาหารปลอดภัยเนี่ยกลับเป็นแหล่งที่ปลอดภัยปราศจากเชื้อไวรัสตัวนี้นะคะเพราะว่า
Tivaporn, can I interrupt to ask, can you explain to our listeners and viewers what is the Hospital Food Safety Project?
ได้ค่ะต้องขอโทษการลืมประเด็นสำคัญโครงการอาหารปลอดภัยเนี่ยเป็นโครงการที่ของรัฐบาลนะคะโดยกระทรวงสาธารณสุขนะคะกระทรวงมหาดไทยกระทรวงเกษตรและสหกรณ์กระทรวงพาณิชย์ค่ะแล้วก็สถาบันพัฒนาองค์กรชุมชนนะคะเป็นองค์กรมหาชนนะคะได้ร่วมกันในการที่จะดำเนินการนำอาหารปลอดภัยเข้าโรงพยาบาลนะคะแล้วก็โครงการนี้มีประชารัฐประเทศไทยนะคะซึ่งเป็นบริษัทใหญ่ในการเป็นศูนย์กลางของ76บริษัทใน76จังหวัดของประเทศไทยนะคะได้เป็นคนดำเนินการและประสานงานโครงการอาหารปลอดภัยเนี่ยเป็นโครงการที่ทางกระทรวงสาธารณสุขได้มีการวิจัยโดยมหาวิทยาลัยมหิดลนะคะได้เห็นผลว่าถ้าคนไข้ยังบริโภคอาหารที่มีสารเคมีสารพิษตกค้างการมีโรคหนึ่งโรคใดในการเข้ามารักษาจะหายไม่ได้เลยถ้าอาหารที่บริโภคหรือทานเข้าไปทุกวันเนี่ยมีสารพิษก็ไปกระทบต่อโรคภัยที่เขาเป็นอยู่ฉะนั้นกระทรวงสาธารณสุขจึงได้คิดว่าอาหารต้องปลอดภัยค่ะการรักษาโรคอื่นๆโรคมะเร็งโรคอะไรอื่นๆก็จะหายขึ้นแล้วก็เป็นการทดลองวิจัยที่น่าสนใจค่ะถึงแม้จะต้องจ่ายค่าอาหารปลอดภัยที่มีราคาสูงกว่าอาหารที่มีเคมีแต่ผลสุดท้ายพอไปดูข้อมูลรวมปรากฏว่าลดปริมาณค่าใช้จ่ายในการดูแลคนไข้ในการค่าบุคลากรทางการแก้ค่าใช้จ่ายในโรงพยาบาลกับลดลงมากยิ่งกว่าจ่ายอาหารที่แพงขึ้นฉะนั้นโครงการอาหารปลอดภัยเนี่ยนอกจากส่งผลดีต่อคนไข้ยังส่งผลดีต่อเกษตรกรผู้ผลิตอาหารส่งผลดีต่อผู้บริโภคทั้งหลายซึ่งสามารถได้หาอาหารที่ปลอดภัยมาบริโภคฉะนั้นดิฉันคิดว่าและสำคัญที่สุดส่งผลต่อสภาพสิ่งแวดล้อมค่ะลดสารเคมีในดินน้ำอากาศใช่ไหมคะส่งผลกระทบต่อสภาพสิ่งแวดล้อมโดยรวมซึ่งเป็นคุณค่ามหาศาลตีราคาไม่ได้ด้วยนะคะอันนี้เป็นโครงการอาหารปลอดภัยค่ะต่อเลยไหมคะ
Yes, please. You had mentioned when we spoke that COVID actually did not impact the project too much. In fact, there was an opportunity because the demand for organic produce was even greater. Can you speak to that, please?
ค่ะก็เราจะทราบว่าพอโควิดมาเนี่ยมันอาจจะหลายแห่งต้องปิดตัวหมดเลยนะคะสถานประกอบการโรงแรมภัตตาคารใช่ไหมคะการปิดประเทศไม่ให้มีการเข้าออกเพื่อไม่ให้การแพร่ของเชื้อโรคเนี่ยเข้าใจแต่ว่าจริงๆแล้วเรื่องของอาหารเรื่องการส่งออกอาหารไม่ได้ปิดนะคะก็ทุกคนต้องบริโภคอาหารจึงเป็นโอกาสดีของเกษตรกรแล้วข้อสำคัญการจะรักษาต่อสู้กับโรคภัยโรคไวรัสนี้ได้หมายความว่าเราต้องมีสุขภาพดีใช่ไหมคะฉะนั้นการบริโภคอาหารปลอดภัยจึงสำคัญที่สุดในขณะนี้การผลิตอาหารปลอดภัยวัตถุดิบส่งเพื่อการแปรรูปจึงสำคัญด้วยเช่นกันจึงเป็นโอกาสดีย้อนกลับมาที่เกษตรกรค่ะที่สามารถได้ผลิตอาหารที่ดีให้กับผู้บริโภคนะคะแล้วก็ฉะนั้นจึงไม่ส่งผลกระทบต่อเกษตรกรนะคะแล้วก็ข้อสำคัญทำให้ผู้บริโภคก็แสวงหาอาหารปลอดภัยก็สามารถที่จะเข้าไปในไร่ในส่วนการผลิตของเกษตรกรเพราะว่าแปลงเกษตรกรน่ะจะเป็นแปลงเปิดที่มีอากาศดีมีสภาพสิ่งแวดล้อมดีใช่ไหมคะก็ช่วยเรื่องของโควิดได้ชัดเจนฉะนั้นโควิดจึงไม่ส่งผลกระทบต่อพี่น้องเกษตรกรเรานะคะแล้วก็เป็นผลดีต่อการส่งออกต่อผู้ประกอบการอื่นๆที่ในการส่งอาหารออกด้วยค่ะ
Thank you, Kun Tivaporn. I think that this is one of the few examples of COVID actually providing an opportunity for this kind of a business and this kind of an initiative. There's increased demand for healthy organic produce, and this became an opportunity for growth. And I'd like to hear a little bit more about how you are responding to that opportunity. But if we could come back to building agile, nimble public-private partnerships, Veronica, PDRF, I think, embodies that. In fact, the R in PDRF changed from relief to resilience. Can you walk us through that transition? What created the need for this kind of a change?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. We actually started in the aftermath of a big flooding in Metro Manila in 2009. So and we started basically to help the government. We responded to the call of the government to help in the rehabilitation. So actually the original name of our organization in Philippine is Philippine Disaster Recovery Foundation. And fast forward to 2013, when Super Typhoon Haiyan happened, a lot of learnings. We really did soul searching there and realized that we really need to invest on preparedness. We need to be proactive. We need to put more analysis in our work. And so 2014, we made this conscious decision to focus on preparedness. And that is why we changed our name to Philippine Disaster Resilience Foundation, giving emphasis on resilience. It is also our approach to, that also signaled the approach to a more forward-looking method to fundraising and resource generation. At that time, we developed this system of a pre-agreement. So because if your organization is dependent on donation, that limits your room for investment and creating financial culture. So you need to be self-sustainable. And so so that we can be proactive in our response and we can be there in the affected area as it happens or immediately after a disaster happens, we need to have pre-agreements. We need to generate resources and pre-agree on how to dispatch them early on. We also need to be financially viable, so that when there is a need to respond, we can immediately do so and not wait for any donation. And that's basically how we are making the organization sustainable. And in 2015 and 2016, we moved to a more strengthened preparedness sustainability by becoming a service-based organization. So we developed programs that is focused on preparing our businesses, our member companies, and we also collected or we invited member companies for a membership fee. So and also we applied for grants to fund for programs, resiliency programs, various programs that we do at the local level and also at the national level.
Thank you, Veronica. And that actually also brings us to a very important question that companies that are considering entering into public-private partnerships will ask, which is for how long? How long do we have to, or do we want to continue to pay into this partnership? What are the means by which this partnership can be financially sustainable and perhaps beyond the end of its project life cycle? How do we make sure that the impact sustains? So from my understanding, the PDRF has multiple revenue streams, including donations from INGOs and local fundraising, but also membership fees from the 60+ member companies. Can you tell us a bit more about how that is balanced, and do you foresee any shocks to this balance in the next few years?
For our member companies, they sign up to an annual fee. So they provide us with annual fee, and that covers for the operating expense of the organization. And to fund our programs, we apply for grants. So we have funding from different grant giving bodies for our different programs. So, and to make sure, especially for our member companies, to make sure that they continue supporting PDRF financially, we do provide them with benefits. So among the benefit is the access to our Emergency Operations Center and the platform, the digital platform, or the ArcGIS-based platform that we have, which gives them access to mapping services of PDRF. We also make sure that we stay relevant as far as a DRR is concerned, and so we partnered with the government in advocating for policies that will make the country disaster resilient. And not only that, as far as our Emergency Operations Center, we make it also interoperable with the UN humanitarian agencies to make sure that we work together rather than separately, but together as be part of the UN humanitarian country team in our country. We go to affected areas and we take advantage of each other's strengths and resources.
It's an important point, Veronica, because what you're saying is that by building a partnership across multiple stakeholders, even if they're not involved in the original PPP, you can sustain impact and have a bigger impact across the ecosystem. Shahnaz, I know you have a lot to say about that. What is the Trust Schools program's approach to financial sustainability and the sustainability of its impact and investment into the broader ecosystem of education?
Okay, well, I have a lot to say just because it's actually a lot of pressure from the private sector to ensure that the transformation cost, is not perpetual, right? We're talking about transforming government schools. So from the early on, I think a lot of our research is around what will be a sustainable model. Which means on the day we enter, we're already thinking about when do we exit and how does that look like? Because then the schools need to continue whatever that culture is without us being there. So our program actually over the last 10 years, we started with 5 years as intervention. So a private sector pays very finite investments. So there's no such thing as continuous funding. Today, we are only doing it 3 years. So after learning quite a lot of things, we are able to improve the model so that you bring that down to the cost. So today, the cost is only about $700 per student for the whole program to get it done. So for private sector, they just want to know there is it's a limit to it, right? It's just not a continuous thing. So that makes it sustainable because then they're happy to do more because they know that they get. And the outcome of that is very clear that, the school reach a certain level of standards where there's very minimal risk of a rollback. Because that's the other thing private sector doesn't want. We do it 3 years and then we go off and then they go back to wherever they are. So we are, after 10 years, we are supported by impact studies, and then we've done studies of schools that we've left for 2 or 3 years and they still maintain their, maintain as the minimum, actually quite a lot actually even move to even a better standard. So that's one level. I think the other level is around optimizing the public spending, because in Malaysia, we probably are quite known in the world as a big spender in education, right? I think we quite being criticized as well, I think by the World Bank, but big spending, but not similar outcomes. So one of the things in this 10 years—
You mean Malaysia as the country, not the Trust Schools program?
Sorry, as a country, yes. So the program 10 years ago, does want to work around making sure that every dollar of public spending actually giving much better returns. So in the 10 years, if you look at the Trust School, the reason why I can talk about this because I have data, right? So it tends to go that the operating expenditure was on a decline, but the standard and the quality of the teachers and the students that comes out are actually on the rise. So that's just to show that every ringgit you're actually getting better outcomes now in the school. So right now, I mean, because these are reference schools, so that the other schools can actually replicate, right? But those are our data points. So from that perspective, sustainability means that as now the government is replicating, unfortunately, education is a long tail play. It's not something we can do overnight, but if it follows that map, right, you will then get at some point, so we'll see our cost. It may not come down as in absolute, but what's important is the quality increase, right, as per the ringgit that's being spent. Yeah, so that is from a sustainability angle of looking at that. So we're optimizing the public sector. Just the other point is that after 5 years, so we've done the schools bit, and then as we're doing the school, then we realize school sustainability hit that standard indicator, but it actually requires the system to also transform as a whole. So the district education officers, the state education officers, I mean, Malaysia have about 14 states, so they have a state education office and 140 something district officers. So we have refined the model in that 3 years. We actually bring state and district earlier on in phase 0, even as we're entering the school. So we align everybody towards what that school actually needs to become at 3 years. That actually adds a lot to sustainability, and guess what? It actually improved the outcomes per public spending as well, right? Because it now makes their role very relevant to what is happening between a teacher and a student. In the past, I mean, a lot of these officers are more ceremonial, I must say, but I hope I don't get ejected out of this country if there's any, I guess, okay, I'm just kidding, right? But now they are very much more, I mean, they're much more they're given the empowerment, they're given the capabilities and capacity. So now whatever they do is really going right down to what's going to happen between that teacher and the student. So the relevance have increased. Actually giving them a lot more meaning as well in their professions, to be fair. So so that makes it more sustainable and hopefully adds to scalability in the long run.
Thank you, Shahnaz. Lots of valuable lessons and learnings for public-private partnerships and how to make them sustainable there. There is another important aspect that I want to talk about, and we're running out of time, which is risks. What are the biggest risks and challenges that you foresee in the next few years? And Tivaporn, if I could begin with you, the Pracharath Samakkee Kanchanaburi is a social enterprise. Presumably that means that it is financially sustainable. Is that the case, or do you see that as the biggest risk over the next few years? What do you see is the biggest challenge as you continue heading this social enterprise?
ในเรื่องของความเสี่ยงในการทำ SE เนี่ยสิ่งที่สำคัญค่ะเราคณะกรรมการต้องเข้มแข็งแล้วก็ต้องเข้าใจในบริบทของการใช้งบประมาณที่มีอยู่ในมือซึ่งเป็นงบที่ได้มาจากบริษัทไทยเบฟนะคะซึ่งถือว่าเป็นพี่ใหญ่ที่เราชื่นชมธนาคารกรุงเทพนะคะแล้วก็ส่วนอื่นเป็นกองทุนหมู่บ้านอันนี้เป็นเงินกองทุนของชุมชนทั่วทั้งจังหวัดเราอันนี้การใช้งบประมาณที่มีอยู่เนี่ยจึงต้องละเอียดรอบคอบนะคะแล้วก็พิจารณาให้ชัดฉะนั้นบริษัทประชารัฐจังหวัดกาญเราเนี่ยใช้งบประมาณไม่เสี่ยงเหมือนกับที่อื่นๆเหตุเพราะว่าเราจะมีเป้าหมายชัดเจนว่าเราใช้เพื่อใช้หนุนเสริมในการเป็นทุนหมุนเวียนหรือใช้ความสามารถของคณะกรรมการเราในการสร้างองค์ความรู้หรือใช้ความร่วมมือของภาครัฐซึ่งมีงบประมาณอยู่แล้วในการไปช่วยกับเกษตรกรโดยตรงกับภาคีเราด้วยแล้วนะคะอันนี้คือเราจะลดความเสี่ยงแล้วกรรมการทุกท่านของเราทำงานอย่างตั้งใจนะคะเป็นจิตอาสานะคะคราวนี้พอความท้าทายค่ะความท้าทายเรามองว่าช่องทางการทำงานแบบ SE มีองค์กรแบบ SE เนี่ยเป็นช่องทางที่สำคัญอีกช่องทางหนึ่งหรือเป็นพื้นที่ที่สำคัญอีกพื้นที่หนึ่งเป็นนวัตกรรมนะคะเหมือนที่ท่านต้องใจบอกนะคะดิฉันคิดว่าวันนี้รัฐบาลซึ่งมีหน้าที่หนุนเสริมการพัฒนาชุมชนในทุกๆด้านแล้วเนี่ยงบประมาณที่ลงไปสู่ชุมชนอาจจะตรงเป้าหมายบ้างไม่ตรงเป้าหมายบ้างเพราะมันเป็นการทำงานร่วมของภาครัฐโดยเฉพาะแต่ SE ประชารัฐเราเนี่ย ทำงานแบบมีส่วนร่วมของทุกภาคส่วนทุกองค์กรเอกชนภาคประชาสังคมนักธุรกิจทั้งหลายที่มีความเชี่ยวชาญในเกือบทุกด้านมานั่งรวมกันอยู่ตรงนี้จึงเป็นความท้าทายค่ะที่จะใช้ความสามารถของทุกองค์กรเนี่ยส่งตรงไปยังพื้นที่หรือชุมชนหรือฐานรากนะคะที่จะแก้ไขปัญหาลดความเหลื่อมล้ำหรือกระจายรายได้ลงสู่ข้างล่างให้ได้ฉะนั้นช่องทางนี้เนี่ยจึงเป็นช่องทางที่สำคัญนะที่รัฐบาลควรจะมองแล้วก็หนุนเสริมนะคะหนุนเสริมให้เต็มพื้นที่หนุนเสริมสิ่งที่ยังไม่เข้มแข็งหรือยังขาด
So I'm hearing that there is room for really maximizing the value of every baht that is invested in the social enterprise from different entities. And in fact, because it can be self-sustaining, this kind of public-private partnership is something that the government can engage more in. That's absolutely great to hear. Veronica, if I could turn to you, what do you think is the biggest risk for PDRF? And since we're almost out of time, also if you could add, if there was one piece of advice you were to give to a budding PPP for social good, what would it be? And the same question for you, Shahnaz, after this.
Yeah, thank you. Risk, we faced it during this pandemic. We were used to, providing help, providing support to affected areas. But with this pandemic, we ourselves have been severely affected as well. And so we need to be agile in sustaining our organization. An example of that is a big portion of our program is into capacity building. So we realized early on that this pandemic will not be done in a short time. And so we pivoted immediately our capacity building programs into the digital platform. And so we were able to establish our online iAdapt. It's an learning platform. And we were able to launch it in October of last year. And now most of our courses are already online, and we also were able to co-develop courses in supporting the government efforts in DRR and also in this pandemic. Another thing also is that financially, the risk of having lower collection of our membership fees there, and we saw that in last year. And we have about 1/4 of our or 2/3 of our companies members were not able to collect on time. And so that is why we need to be sustainably financially sustainable as well. And another also way of being relevant is that to strengthen our advocacy so that we can participate in policy formulation, establishing standards, and sharing private sector expertise. So in closing, we advocate for private sectors in other countries to start, and they can start small, like how we did. It can be in the platform of chambers of commerce. It can be but one thing is for sure, and that is I would like to echo what the CEOs, Ms. Ruth, presented a while ago. It's about the process. It's about the people, having those people and processes in place, and also, more importantly, having a champion. So if you have a champion, a business leader who will advocate for you, the rest will follow. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica. I was hoping someone would mention champions who are actually absolutely critical individuals at all stages, at all times of the project lifecycle that keep it churning along. Shahnaz, if we could hear from you, please.
Okay, so risk and advice, that's what it is, right?
Yes.
Okay. The risk for us as social entrepreneurs, we are concerned about the impact to beneficiaries. So basically it's the students. But I think the biggest risk right now is that education is falling off a little bit of prioritization of everybody because of the pandemic. So everybody is focusing more on the health and economy, and people are deprioritizing. I think that's a big risk because honestly speaking, education was going to cause a lot of deeper long-term impact. It's almost like you're leaving the world with the future generation with the debt, and then you're also not giving them the skills to deal with it, right? So, it's actually going to cause a lot more issue. I think OECD report recently was issued. The last 12 months, there's 80% of the class time actually, gone. So which means is we were already playing catch up before the pandemic. I think the widening of the inequity and the gaps so much more. So so we cannot deprioritize education. That's number one. Second is that not only that, I think we have to accelerate it. And I think the only way to accelerate it if we all not reinvent the wheel. Let's learn from each other because in this 10, 12 minutes, we talk about successes. But honestly, in the 10 years, I think we did a lot more mistakes. We learned a lot more things. We've done experiments. We know what didn't work. But, I think we need to learn from each other so that we can accelerate the solution. The observation that I just have in the region, particularly, I have two issues on domestic and region, but at the end of the day, it's like your neighbor. So you need to get everybody to agree onto the same destination so that you want to try to move that same destination. But the route will change because it depending on what your localization, your local context and so on. So we think we have to work through local partners, but how do we then connect to make sure that we can share and do this cross-sharing? And at the end of the day, I think we have to address, if I say, sometimes people say it's a scary world, Shahnaz, but the scary world of the public education system, right? I think we have to address that right smack in it because that's where children spend most of their time, right? So if we don't transform that and then we do everything outside it, I think they're not accelerating in terms of the benefit outcome. So for me, those two, don't deprioritize. I do not want to see education being deprioritized. I think this is, second is that we need to rally together to accelerate the solution actually. Because there is a sense of urgency on it.
Thank you, Shahnaz. And I think your words as well as Veronica's and Tivaporn's are it was very important to hear from the three of you at this moment in time when there is a lot of uncertainty. You are shining a light on the path forward, how to build sustainable public-private partnerships for social good that are delivering better education, that are making a country and communities more resilient, and that are improving livelihoods in rural areas. And you've shared some of the strategies that have helped you, like aligning the incentives of all the partners involved, being resilient and nimble. And this is especially true thanks to COVID. It will become even more true as we try to grapple with climate change and a changing workplace and work environment. You're thinking about sustainability and you're all forward-looking. And although all of us are facing big challenges, at least I'm coming away from this conversation with a renewed sense of optimism. You're doing it well, you're showing everyone else how can do it. And for that, me and everyone else at CAPS and everyone who's listening is very grateful. And there's much more that you are doing beyond this that I think our listeners and viewers will have to go download our report to hear more about, or maybe get in contact with you because I'm sure you've inspired many today. So thank you so much for your time and thank you for sharing your words with us.